Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Isaac Beachy. I'm a wedding photographer and filmmaker here in Indiana. I am just going to do a little review of why I'm switching from Canon after using Canon professionally for the past like 6 to 7 years in my career. Recently I've been using the Canon R6 system. That's what I'm using to film this right now. So my current wedding setup was I had 2 of those on my body, and then I also had the R7 to film ceremonies. Recently, I've decided to switch to Sony. I decided to go with the Sony a7R5. So this is my first ever Sony camera. So I don't have anything to compare it to, Sony-wise. But as far as comparing it to the Canon R6, I'm not sure how much I actually like it, but I believe we are going to keep it. So reasons that threw me off at the start, everyone was talking about how amazing the screen was. When I first turned it on, I thought it looked pretty pathetic compared to the Canon R6 screen. Like you could actually see the pixels a little bit. So I thought that was a little weird. I know, like when I was watching other reviews, I thought a lot of people were talking about how good the screen was. But the screen on the R6 I feel like looked way more clear. I don't know like how many million pixels it was compared to each of these, but to me the R6 screen definitely looked better. That's not a make or break for me obviously, because we're still keeping the Sony. That just threw me off. Another thing I thought was weird, everyone was talking about the amazing AI autofocus. I do believe the autofocus in this is incredible. But I still feel like the autofocus in the R6 is like almost as close, if not as good. Maybe it's just because I've used it a lot and I know I feel like we bond really well, but I feel like this also does the same thing where it goes where I think it's going to go. So it's really amazing. I feel like the marketing of just calling it AI is just really a big seller, because honestly the R6 autofocus is still incredible. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the IBIS. I've not compared the IBIS of this to the Canon side by side. Just from using both of them, I feel like they're both really close. I've not used a native lens on this though. I only have the Tamron 35 to 150 right now. So without a native lens on this, I feel like it's really close to the R6 with native lenses on it. The other thing that was a little bit of a bummer, which I figured was going to be a decent problem with the file size of this, is the buffer is definitely slower than the R6. Obviously, I mean, the sensor is 3 times the size. But even when I'm shooting compressed RAW, it definitely takes a solid second to switch from photo to video. But I think those times are almost equal when you add the time of switching from C3 to the video on the R6. And then on the R5, you just push the record button to go into manual. So that's one thing that's super nice about the Sony, is being able to switch to video without having to turn the knob, because that's really annoying. But yeah, really that's the biggest downfall for me, is the file size of the R5. I just don't need it, but I like the specs of everything else about the R5, so that's why I ended up going with this instead of the Sony a7 IV. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I've not totally caught up with all the names of the Sony lineup. I once again came up through the Sony ecosystem. I mean the Canon ecosystem. Yes, so those are all the cons for me. But now for the pros, because obviously I do thoroughly enjoy this camera, henceforth why we are keeping it. So picking it up for the first time in the hand, it does feel amazing. I love the ergonomics of it. Canon's I feel like is a little bit girthier, which feels good on my big hands, but I love the on and off switch is right up here. That just makes me so happy, and after using it for a few photo shoots, I know it's such a small thing, but it really does feel really good. I love having the 2 dials up here instead of having the knob, which you can use the knob, but I have now ISO set up right here, and then shutter speed and then aperture up front. The knobs are super nice. I feel like every camera should be that way. So now for the biggest reason of why I decided to keep the Sony and go continue to transition into the Sony system was the fact that they allow third-party lenses. Honestly, it was really annoying that Canon is getting rid of or locking people out of creating lenses for their system. I used to have I do have the Canon 85 1.4, which is my favorite lens for that system, and Canon was shut down the manufacturing of that. So now that Tamron has the 35 to 150 f2.8, I was really interested in trying that out. I'm a solely prime shooter, but that would definitely make the ceremonies exponentially easier. So that was one of my biggest reasons for switching to Sony, and I can't wait to use the Tamron. But also, Sony just has a way more mature line of prime lenses and pro prime lenses for the system. Canon only has their 24 and 35 1.8 lenses, which have done pretty good, but they're still not up to par from what I've seen on the Sony side. So I'm really excited to get the Sony 24 1.4 and 35 1.4 and use those. There's also one other thing that I'm really excited to try out in the Sony, and that is the face remembrance, where you can input someone's face into the camera and it'll remember it and pick that face out of a crowd and focus on them. So specifically during a wedding day, that should be really nice to try, and at the start of the day, put the bride and groom's face in here. And so when they're walking down the aisle, it's solely focused on them and no one else, and I am really excited about that. Overall, the Sony a7R5 I feel is an amazing camera, and I think it's going to treat me really well this wedding season. It is hard for me to leave the Canon system, and if it wasn't for Sony having all the amazing third-party lenses to go along with this, I would have stayed with Canon. But with Canon locking that out, I'm definitely going to be transitioning to the Sony system. So for the start of this year, I'm going to switch to using the Sony a7R5 along with an R6 also, just so I don't have to switch all my lenses right away. So I add a few Sony lenses at a time so I can get comfortable with them. Thank you guys so much for watching my YouTube channel. This is my first video I made. I am super excited about this channel, and I can't wait to bring out more gear reviews and how-to videos for weddings and photography in general. So if you'd like, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and I will be pumping out a lot more content. Thanks.